Welcome to Keep What You Earn, your judgment and jargon-free zone for entrepreneurs of all levels. Get ready to learn how to scale your business, save money in taxes, and create a business that grows your wealth. If it feels like the financial side of business is like eating your vegetables, well, then think of this podcast as the ranch dressing to make the process a little more enjoyable. My name is Shannon. I'm a CPA and business owner on a mission to simplify money and empower others through knowledge. I hope this episode inspires you to take action, but remember that the information we share is for educational purposes only and is not individual tax advice. Now that we got that out of the way, let's start the show. So we all know that the best way to improve profit in a business is to do one of two things. One is make more money, aka sales, aka revenue. The other is to cut more costs. So really, it's kind of this binary thing of, do I want to earn more or save more or both? And how am I going to balance those priorities to earn myself more profit? That's kind of the constant financial struggle of an entrepreneur. And I wanted to provide you a sort of framework to find cost savings in your business. I am usually a bigger advocate for finding creative ways to earn more strategically without incurring additional costs. Typically, that's called scaling. But what I wanted to do is actually cover the other side of the equation, which is the cost savings side, and say, hey, here's sort of my approach when I look at a profit and loss statement on how we can cut costs and what I want you to focus on first. So if you're in a position where costs are adding up and you're trying to figure out where to cut first, this is the episode for you. And I want to start with reframing how you're looking at your costs versus it's going to be side note, it's going to be so easy and tempting to go for the highest cost and go, I'm going to lower that. That's my biggest cost. Sometimes the biggest cost is supposed to be the biggest cost. You run a marketing agency, your biggest cost is labor. Same thing with the accounting firm. You run an e-commerce brand, your biggest cost is inventory. It always is. It always is. So it's supposed to be. Now, there's a couple of ways to look at your costs, and I'm going to give you kind of two frameworks, two approaches to look at this so you can identify where the cuts have to happen. Number one is which of your costs, and I want you to open your profit and loss statement and think about this. Which of your costs are unrelated to how much you sell? That's going to be one of your big targets. And what I call these your fixed costs. Fixed costs are typically things that will happen, costs that will be incurred, regardless if you sell another widget. So I'll give you some examples. So I have an e-commerce brand as a customer, and she has the variable costs of inventory in the sense of, when I call that a variable cost, what I mean is that as demand picks up, she orders more inventory, but ordering more inventory means she's selling more and making more money. That is the core thing that makes money. So spending more on inventory is not necessarily a bad thing based on how we've projected out the inventory. So what would be a cost I'm describing in her situation? It might be actually me. Administrative costs, office expenses, software costs. It could be administrative labor, legal and professional services. It could be office rent if she had an office that she rented. So all of those types of overhead costs, if they're unrelated to how much you're selling and they're not necessary for the business, then those would be some areas where you might want to consider cutting. Now, it doesn't mean they're not a priority. This is where you have to then apply your prioritization and say, well, this is how this person or this service is adding value into my business. I cannot cut that. That's fine. You have to individually establish where these things can happen, or if you can freeze or pause or whatever when you're having a low cash flow situation or low profitability, that until you recover it, this is what you'll have to cut. But the ways to target this, I would stick with what are things that are unrelated to sales, let's say. So for example, if I have a client who they have a large team and they say, Shannon, I need to make cuts. I need to lay some people off. Who do I lay off? Now, they have a mix, right? They have salespeople who work off of a commission plus base. They have some folks who are commission only, and they have some people who are base only, like salaried. And I look at the base only salaried people first. I'm not saying they are the first to get cut. I'm saying the first to be evaluated. Chances are we're going to keep all of them, right? Because they may be essential employees like officers, the officers of the company. Do we reduce their salaries? Possibly. Do we switch them into a more of an incentive based commission model? Possibly. But we're going to look at them first because they are the fixed costs that no matter what we sell, they're going to make their salary and they could be an anchor weighing us down versus the folks who make commission are going to make commission based on sales. So they only become a huge cost if we're making a ton of money. So it's not really that much of a problem because if we're making enough money to cover them being a big expense, then we're probably in a better position. We just have to make sure that we're profitable per sale. So every sale we make, they make a percent, we keep a percent, and that percentage helps us pay all our overhead costs. We're good to go. So all I'm saying is when you're looking at finding cost savings, start with the things that are going to be a cost to you, whether you sell 0 widgets or 100. Because if you're in the 0 widgets category and you're having a really slow couple of months, the first things to cut are those that are unrelated to the sales. You want to be saving those expenses. Typically, I just say they're the first to evaluate. They're probably the first to go, but you have to really look at your own situation. I'm not telling you that you must then cut all your administrative staff if you're having a dip in profitability. Now, you also want to look at the ROI on your costs to make sure that you're spending wisely. Another thing to look at is, like, for example, your ad spend, your cost of customer acquisition. So if you're spending a lot to acquire a customer, really reevaluating if your customer acquisition costs are healthy and if you need to be cutting anything there. So you want to be looking at customer acquisition costs. What I just described is kind of like your operating costs. And then lastly, what you want to be looking at is taxes. So if you're looking at this as a framework, we say operating costs are probably the first ones to start looking at because they're the most quote unquote optional. Customer acquisition obviously is related to acquiring new customers or selling your product. That is going to be harder for you to cut, but sometimes that is the most essential thing for you to cut because you're spending too much money. You're spending dollars to make dimes, and you have to know if that's happening. You have to know if the customer acquisition costs are outweighing how much money you're actually making off those customers. You have to make sure you know your customer lifetime value to know if your costs are worth it. So if your average customer acquisition cost is $1,000, but your average customer lifetime value is $500, that's not good because then you're spending $1,000 to make 500. That's not good. Now, if you don't know these numbers, that is the first step. The first step is being aware of these numbers and how they impact you. Because as you'll realize, these are actually extremely powerful because they'll enable you to know when this is happening and to figure out when there's a hole in the boat, as opposed to waiting until you're up to your knees in water and you're like, oh, there's a hole in the boat, to identify it a lot sooner. Now, lastly, I mentioned taxes. Taxes are the biggest expense for an entrepreneur. And I've mentioned this before on the show, but first and foremost, I look at operating costs and I look at acquisition costs as the drivers of cost savings. Then I look at taxes and I say, okay, are there opportunities to reduce tax liability by making small tweaks, small decisions that are already in line with what you're already doing behavior wise? I would not adopt some extreme tax saving strategy. I just wouldn't, in the name of saving money in taxes, when in reality, your actual problem is just more uncomfortable to solve. So I'll give you an example. In my example I just gave you, where it's costing us $1,000 to make 500 in a customer acquisition cost scenario, what I find is that can be happening to somebody, but they also got a big tax bill. And that's the first thing they feel because they're leaking profit. They're leaking profitability. But that is conceptual. That is not like, it's not really clear that they're losing money per customer. What they're not realizing is that, yes, there was a big tax bill that hit your cash flow, but that is not as much of a problem as you losing 50% of your revenue for every customer. Losing 50% is worse than losing 20% or paying 20% or whatever it is in taxes. So you have to know where it stands in the priority list. I think people are too quick to jump to the conclusion that the first place to save money in is taxes. And that's what we need to focus on. And that's also why a lot of content is popular on tax savings, including my own. However, we start with, well, what are the real problems here? I almost all right, I'm going to give an analogy here that's going to sound a little bit extreme, but like these tax strategies are becoming like the Ozempic for businesses, saying if you just do this, you'll achieve the outcome that you want, as opposed to doing the very thing that is at the core of the problem and addressing the core of the problem, which is typically behavioral, typically something that relates to poor money management and cash flow management. But instead of addressing the real problem and fixing it, we're like, hey, what is the quickest way to make this go away? And superficially. So a lot of people were using Ozempic, let's say, for weight loss, as opposed to eating fruits and vegetables and doing exercise. Right? There's always the diet pill or the quick fix. So whatever that may be for you, I want you to just acknowledge that, like, are you avoiding doing the work, the long lasting work, in the name of the quick results to make something go away? And can you do that to make it go away for now, to get out of a hairy situation and to get out of survival mode? Yeah, I won't judge you. But I think what you have to do is walk away with the, oof, I do not want that to happen again. We are not going to do that again. We really need to be working on the cash flow problem and be focused on that. Too much emphasis is placed on tax saving strategies as opposed to cash management strategies. And that's something that I want you to focus on as an entrepreneur. If you're a listener of this show, I hope you agree with me. That is going to be the focus here on out for your business, is how do I manage cash better, not how do I save taxes better. It's still important. It's just secondary. So if you're looking at cost savings, I want you to ask you this question and have you answer this for yourself. If you are trying to save money or reduce costs, why? What conditions are present? What situation are you in that is leading you to conclude that this is something you need to do? I'm not doubting you. I'm not doubting you for a second that this is something you probably should be doing. But I want you to ask, why are you now focused on cost savings? Why are you now focused on doing the things that you need to be doing? And what recent events, triggers, experiences have led you to this? And I want you to give serious thought to whether this is something that has just been adding up over time, if this is related to a particular spot event, or if this is something that really needs a behavioral change. There's no wrong answer to that question, just the answer that you believe is true to you. But I want you to unpack that before you immediately jump into the strategy and jump into the tactics of what you actually have to do. I want you to get back into the root of why are you in this position where you're even considering saving money in taxes or in customer acquisition or in operational costs. If you want to start cutting costs, well, how do we get here? And ask yourself that honest question, because I think that will help direct you into the solution. One of the things that holds people back from starting their business and going all in on it to grow it is this hesitation around setting it up properly or cleaning things up to make sure everything is legally and compliantly sound. Between setting up the actual business legally and knowing how to manage the money, there's a lot that can intimidate somebody and scare them into not starting. And that's why I bundled up my 5 best resources all together for brand new business owners or for anyone who's looking to clean things up. This is my 5-day mindset refresh, because you know it always starts with mindset, and my business financial quick starter, which is my starter course for anyone looking to start a business with all the key elements you need to do in order. My tax deduction guide with hundreds of deductions you can take for your business today. My Money Pro matchmaker on how to find the right professional for you, and my cash flow forecasting mini course. This is the ultimate Swiss Army knife. It includes tools and templates, everything you need to get started on your business successfully, or clean things up if you feel like you've fallen behind. Grab your copy right now. The Small Business Starter Kit is yours for free using the link in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and review on your podcast platform. This small action goes a long way for podcasters to get our message heard by more business owners just like you. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to information about our guests and ways to get in touch with me. We'll see you on the next episode.